Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. And last week, after Kemi Badenoch said that Terry Pratchett was her favourite author, the late author's daughter queried the mismatch between the philosophy in the books that she enjoys and her own beliefs. So I produced a video on some of the major differences between the morals within the Discworld series and Badenoch's politics. And then blow me, Windows 11 tells me that this week is World Novel Week. So maybe we should look at what fiction has to teach us about politics in a little bit more depth. So then let's get started. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So as well as Discworld books, there are political and philosophical nuggets to be found in many of the great works of fiction. But I'm going to start with two mostly obvious authors. There are two authors in particular who wrote books which don't just have hidden political wisdom, but the stories deliberately crafted to teach us about politics. I speak, of course, of Niccolo Machiavelli and George Orwell. So let's go through three of the most celebrated political novels in Western history. First, The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli goes back centuries. It is from him we have developed the term Machiavellian to describe someone who employs cunning in the pursuit of political advantage. The Prince's main intended lessons are that political leaders must be pragmatic, even to the point of prioritising their political mission over established moral values. One of the more controversial lessons that Machiavelli posits, and there are quite a few of them, is that ideally a ruler will be loved and feared, but if it cannot be both, prioritise being feared. The stick has priority over the carrot. That being said, the book also warns of the dangers of being cruel or greedy. The ruler must be seen to be fair and consistent, or they risk being overthrown. Of course, Machiavelli wrote his work in the days where democracies were few and far between. It is possible that not all of the same wisdom holds today, but the overriding conclusion of the work is that a leader needs to make sure they remain in power. The book contains lessons on, for example, choosing advisors wisely, looking ahead to the future, plotting it out, not just staring at their own feet and where they are right now. And that how people perceive you is more important than who you really are. Some things never change. Then we have two from Orwell. Animal Farm teaches us that power leads to corruption. We see this in modern politics at various levels. Like, for example, what happens to democracy when the same party wins a seat reliably time after time? It becomes less important to choose a candidate who can win over the public and more one who will pander to the wishes of the small number of people who decide who that candidate is. Basically, if Machiavelli teaches us the importance of fear, then democracy requires that politicians fear the public. Maybe not in quite the same literal way as 16th century Florence, but if a politician takes their votes for granted, voters will not be their priority unless you just happen to have that rarest of unicorns, someone who discharges their public duties without specific incentives. But we'd feel more comfortable if the politician was incentivized to prioritise the public. And how do they do that? Well, the public have to make them feel that their power is not guaranteed. But Animal Farm also teaches the importance of education and critical thinking in order to avoid being manipulated by snake oil salesmen. We know that those with higher levels of education, for example, didn't generally support Brexit. Populism works often on the basis of presenting what sounds like a simple solution to a problem you don't understand. You know, if you understand a problem, someone presents something that's not going to work, because you understand it, you'll sort of at least query it. Whereas if you don't understand the problem at all, it's really easy for someone to present a solution to you that sounds plausible. Animal Farm also shows us that the freedom fighters of today can end up being the tyrants of tomorrow. Selfish people are attracted to politics because they're attracted to power, and they are therefore attracted to whatever is the winning politics of the day. Robert Jenrick, for example, went from moderate centre-right Tory when that style was in the ascendancy to racist far-right fascist as soon as the wind started to blow the other way. People who want power for themselves will adopt values according to which ones give them the route to that power. But they're not really believers in the movement. They pretend to be in order to seize power, betraying the project from within. We saw this with Boris Johnson and Brexit, famously writing 2 articles for the Telegraph, one urging that we should leave the EU and one urging that we should remain. he decided that his best route to power was to be on the side of those wanting to leave. Then, of course, Orwell's greatest work, 1984. This is a sombre warning against allowing the rise of fascism, which sadly anti-fascists seem to be ignoring and fascists seem to be getting ideas from. I'm not sure that was Orwell's plan. The main lessons are that a totalitarian authority can decide what is reality. After the Ministry of Plenty, a name itself chosen to warp reality, categorically states that the chocolate rations will not be reduced, they decide that they're going to have to be reduced from 30 grams to 20 grams. So in order to avoid breaking their pledge, they just rewrite the historical record to delete the reference to not reducing rations and substituting it with a statement that the rations will probably have to be reduced by April. Then, when they announce the reduction from 30 grams to 20 grams, they actually announce it as an increase to 20 grams. And many of the people fall for it. They've become so conditioned to accepting statements from the government without question that they simply never think about it. They were told their chocolate rations had increased, and so they believed that it had. We can see today just how readily people believe things today where they believed the opposite things 2 years ago, without ever questioning the veracity of the statement. Once they have accepted an authority as a truth giver, they are never questioned. Nigel Farage has people believing things today where he was telling them the opposite literally a few years ago. They just instantly transitioned without ever giving it a thought. 1984 also warns of the ability of an all-powerful state to limit our thinking by limiting our vocabulary. Now, I don't think we have a direct example of this today, but we see something very similar. We do see populist leaders changing what certain terms mean. It works towards the same end. It restricts people's vocabulary, not by removing the words, but by removing the meanings instead. It still limits people's ability to think critically if entire concepts have been surgically removed from their brains. For example, for one group of populists, anyone to the left of Hitler is a communist or radical left. For other groups, anyone to the right of Trotsky is a fascist. Populists don't like nuance. There is their position, everything else is enemy territory. But although these three books are super important for getting us to think about political systems, there are also interesting ideas in other works of fiction. I'll go over a couple of my favourites, then let me know yours in the comments below. So, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There, the galactic president's not actually a political leader. The galactic president exists purely to be a distraction for the people, while the real government are a handful of elites operating behind the scenes. So the galactic president is always just basically a dim-witted showman. But my favourite, I think, is the planet of the lizard overlords. The people there hate their lizard overlords, but they're so fixated in making sure that in elections they pick the right lizard, like the one that's the least shit, that it never occurs to them that they should have a better choice. And this speaks to the problems we have with the first past the post system in Britain. There is renewed concern of vote splitting along political lines, left or right. Whichever side splits their vote the most loses. But the real problem here is not that one side will split their vote more, it is that the system allows the vote to be split at all. We could change our system to allow people to have more choice, and the fear of one group winning 100% of power based on maybe not even 30% of the vote evaporates. Then we come to the granddaddy of them all in terms of my particular choice of fiction, Tolkien. The political lessons, I think, are more subtle, and yet all of his books are about politics, because all of them are about governments. And Tolkien goes further even than Orwell in some regards. Like in Tolkien, it's not just a statement that power corrupts. Even specifically wanting power to do good corrupts. Boromir wants the ring to protect his people. He doesn't want power for himself. He's actually a very selfless leader. He would give his life for his friends and his countrymen. He literally dies defending two hobbits. They're not his own people. He's only known them for a few months. But such is his desire to fight for his people, and so hopeless does he think the situation seems, that he becomes desperate. He becomes corrupted by the ring. He sees it as his only way to save his people, and he tries to steal it by force. Galadriel and Gandalf experience the same desire to do good with the ring, but they recognise it would be impossible. Their power to do good would turn into tyranny. And this explains the importance of having a separation of powers in government. You cannot concentrate all power into one person or body. And this is something that's been badly exposed in the United States right now. In theory, power is divided very neatly. But as the Supreme Court and Congress have ceded their power to the executive would-be tyrant, that separation of powers is no protection against corruption. And although I went over them last week, a couple of my favourites from the Discworld books I've read, which is far from all of them, I have to say. I've not read as many as Kemi Badenoch, although maybe I learned more than she did. The first is on the poverty trap. The story is told of buying boots. A good pair of boots might cost $50, but they will last you for many, many years. A cheaper pair will cost like $10, but they'll only last a season. They'll fall apart. Poor people can't afford $50 at any one time to buy the good boots. So they have to get what they can, the $10 boots, but they're not going to last. So that forces them to keep paying that $10 every time their boots falls apart and they get $10. Eventually, after a few years, the rich person who could afford the good boots to begin with, they've actually spent less on footwear than the poorer person. The poorer person is spending more on protecting their feet than the rich person. And there are plenty of examples of this in society. People with less money have to pay more for the same products. Higher interest on loans, higher transport costs if you can't afford a car, higher prices for groceries if you have to buy at the local store rather than a big supermarket. And then there's my absolute favourite in the Discworld series, again, the ones I've read. Evil begins when you begin to treat people as things. Granny Weatherwax. Not an easy thing to consider what sort of people are good or bad, is it? Or even evil in the most extreme cases. Like, people make these judgments all the time. They will denounce people as good, bad, sometimes even evil, far more than they should. How much do people base it on instinct rather than careful appraisal? Like, people do good things and bad things. People are selfish and selfless. What's the balance for someone to be net good or net bad? And how much do you know about a person to be able to make that balance? It's very tricky, isn't it? But this concept is quite interesting. Do you treat a person as a person or as a statistic, a thing? Like, a good doctor might take the time to find out about the needs of their patient. A bad one might just go down the checklist of symptoms. A good teacher considers what the student wants to do with their education. A bad one may just need to get their grades and chalk another one up. You can apply it to a lot of situations, not the least of which is politics. It's a much tidier definition. It's much easier to see whether a person treats people as people or as things than it is to study their entire life and work out what is the balance of good and bad acts. Mind you, it does sort of run contrary to the teachings of Machiavelli, doesn't it? Which is maybe a way to close this circle. But those are some of the inspirations I've taken from fiction, and not even considering many others, and not even touching on the vast store of wisdom in Doctor Who over the decades, although that's technically television. Have any novels made you think differently about the way your country's governed? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.